Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com. Broadcasting live from the great city of Manchester, England. This is The Richie Allen Show on DavidIke.com.
And it is live. Good morning to you, whoever you are, wherever you are. It is 11 a.m. It is bright and beautiful in Manchester here in northwest England. It's great to be with you. It's Sunday the 3rd of April 2016. As always, thanks for joining me. I think this is the third time we've done Sunday View live. It's going to be live from now on in association with DavidIke.com/headlines every Sunday at 11 a.m. British Summer Time live. Thanks for joining me. Great stuff. Do stay in touch throughout the programme with DavidIke.com/headlines. As you know, there will be even deeper, even more in-depth analysis of the stories I cover today on David's website. The headlines page is essential. It's vital reading every day. Check him out. We're broadcasting live on Fab Radio 2 here in Manchester at fabradiointernational.com. My own website as well. And it's good. It's good. Having a really lovely weekend. Went to Chester yesterday. I do bore you, dear listener, with the details of my sojourns. The little trips, the little jaunts around Lancashire, South Lancashire, North Lancashire, into North Wales sometimes. It's lovely. Trains at the moment in Britain, particularly where we are incredibly, incredibly good value. Now, I know if you're taking longer haul train journeys, it gets ridiculously expensive. But if you're going 25, 30 miles, 50 miles, it's incredibly, incredibly affordable. And it's lovely. We went to Chester yesterday and had a lovely time. And on the way, on the train, I met Matt, who listens to the programme, the radio programme in the week, and recognised my loud Irish brogue and came up to say hello and had a lovely chat. He was going to Chester to do some workshops about awakening, but also about solutions. So I didn't mention it yesterday, Matt. I know you're listening to the programme because you get the podcasts. Do let me know about these workshops in the future and I'll be happy to promote them. Of course I will. I'll give all the coverage in the world and all the promotion to things like that. I think it's terrific. So yeah, lovely day in Chester yesterday. The weather wasn't too great, but we had a lovely day. Found a lovely French restaurant, French bistro there. Met a lovely Frenchman called Fred, whose wife is French from Biarritz, and she's in the kitchen cooking wonderful, beautiful, gorgeous, very affordable food. Lovely to get out, isn't it? It's lovely to get out. There you are. Today I'm going to be a hermit though. When I finish chatting with you, my friend, I'll be spending most of the afternoon watching cricket. Oh yeah. But I'm not going to tell you about cricket because there are far more important things to tell you about than cricket this particular Sunday, April 3rd. Shall we have a look at the papers then? That's what the programme is all about. We do take a quick look at the papers. Before I do that, I want to say hi to a couple of people. Patricia Braunschweiler. Patricia, how are you? Great supporter of the independent media in general and a huge supporter of the Richie Allen radio show, being too generous. As is Mark Bajerski. Check out markbajerski.com. Top man. You've heard Mark on the programme in the past. You will hear him again in the not too distant future, all going well, should he agree to come back on. Check out dataclinic.co.uk and livingasyoursoul.com. These people are very important because they support the independent media as well. Alrighty, shall we move on then? So we'll have a quick look at the headlines and the front pages of the British broadsheet and tabloid newspapers this Sunday. Of course, I've forgotten to say to you, tweet me at any time during the programme. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. Email richie@richieallen.co.uk. Good morning, Scott Cornish. How you doing, Scott? Speaking of supporters of the programme, Marco as well. How you doing, Marco? Nice to know that you're tuned in live to Sunday View. David Kona says he would like to attend Matt's workshops. I'll get the details, David. I'll get the details and we will put those details out on Facebook, social media, Twitter, and of course I'll mention them on the live radio programmes. And Anne Selly, great friend of ours and a long time listener and supporter of the independent media in general as well. Anne is listening. Good morning, Anne. I hope you're having a nice weekend wherever you happen to be. Remember, folks, davidike.com/headlines. Right, the newspaper front pages then. If you have been up and about this morning, you have had the radio or the television on, you will know that some of the papers are going big on a doping scandal story. apparently a doctor has been secretly giving performance-enhancing drugs to British athletes, including, apparently, Premier League footballers. That's the big story, right, in some of the papers. Now, I'm not going to dwell an awful lot on that because, you know, it's interesting for those of us who like sport, but in the greater scheme of things, it's not so important. If you want to find out more about that story, that doctor allegedly doping his clients, boxers, footballers and all of that, you need only go online yourself and have a look at it, all right? It's not huge. To me, the Sunday Mail is, though, front page headline on the Sunday Mail, the big headline in bold letters, you can't miss it. You can see it from the moon. £172 million is what we in Britain overspent on foreign aid last year by mistake, says the Mail, as sneaked out by the government on Friday. That, says the Mail, is enough to keep Port Talbot steel plant alive for 6 months. Now, I'm going to read you just a wee snippet of that story. Shall I read a little bit of it? A political row erupted last night after it emerged that Britain overspent its foreign aid budget by nearly £200 million last year. The extraordinary figure, writes the Sunday Mail, was part of a massive $513 million rise in foreign aid in 2015 following the government's decision to set a controversial new target. Overseas aid spending has now risen to a highest ever £12.2 billion. But shock figures from the Department for International Development, or DFID, show the government overshot its own target by £172 million. The news came as a Mail on Sunday campaign launched last week to scrap David Cameron's pledge to spend a set percentage of the national income on overseas aid. The poll carried out by, or the petition carried by the Daily Mail, won overwhelming support, says the Mail, as an astonishing 150,000 people signed our petition on a parliamentary website. The Mail on Sunday is calling on the government to drop the target, which critics say encourages spending by necessity rather than spending by need and invites waste and corruption. It is the biggest newspaper e-petition ever, with the number of signatures on our petition already enough to force MPs to consider a debate, writes the Sunday Mail. David Cameron has pledged to spend 0.7% of the UK's gross national income on developing countries. But new statistics released on the DFID's, that's the Department for International Development's website, on Friday showed that the government not only met the target, it exceeded it by £172 million. And this is the crux of it, dear listeners, this is the crux of it. Some people arguing that money could have been spent on jobs, on homes, on schools, or on hospitals in Britain, or arguably on rescuing businesses like British Steel, companies like Tata, like the steel plant in Port Talbot, where thousands and thousands of people work and their jobs are in jeopardy. That's where the Sunday Mail is going with that one, right? So they quote a number of people, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Conservative MP, who said, and I quote, "There can be no more graphic example of the idiocy of setting such a fixed target. This overspend will anger taxpayers who do not want their money frittered away on politicians' vanity." No mention of the steelworkers, except for in the subheading on the Sunday Mail story. The subheading says that £172 million would guarantee the Port Talbot factory for about 6 months, giving them time, I suppose, to figure out how to save all those jobs. Now, speaking about the crisis, because there's no better word, I suppose, the crisis facing British Steel at the moment, it's making all the news programmes this morning. Andrew Marr has been talking about it. Dermot Murnaghan on Sky has been talking about it. Marr has interviewed John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. He's also interviewed Sajid Javid, who's the Business Secretary. And I must say this, and you can find this yourself if you think I'm exaggerating it. Marr absolutely caught Sajid Javid by the short and curlies on the Andrew Marr programme this morning, because Javid has been to meet the Port Talbot workers. This has been filmed and it's been shared around the internet. Javid was standing there looking very, I don't know, was he looking very stately? I suppose stately is a good word, telling the Port Talbot workers, we're going to do everything. The government has been working day and night to secure your jobs. But Andrew Marr completely caught him out and said, well, this particular government in Europe, the British government, has fought the hardest against tariffs on Chinese steel at meetings in Brussels over the last couple of years. No government has done more to protect China's right to dump cheap steel in the European Union than Britain. Eh? Liars. And when I got sick as that, I switched over to Moynihan. Moynihan had on a real expert to talk about steel. John Sargent, the broadcaster, the journalist allegedly, wouldn't shut up about how complicated this all is. Like the British public are too stupid to get it. It's very complicated, Dermot. It's difficult to do what's best for British manufacturing and workers. Firms want the cheapest price. How can the government intervene? Can you force companies to buy British? How can you block companies around the world from doing their job to compete and make money and all that nonsense? It takes years to sort all this sort of stuff out, said John Sargent. And puppet presenter Dermot Moynihan just sat there nodding away, instead of saying, well, in the United States, they heavily penalise companies for doing that. And they protect, not always now, I'm not an idiot, not always, but largely, when it comes to steel, Pittsburgh, they protect it. No. And of course, they won't discuss nationalisation. You know, when somebody mentions nationalisation, which John McDonnell did mention to Andrew Marr this morning, it's like an alarm bell goes off in the presenter's earpiece. Attack, 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 attack. Don't let them talk nationalisation. I'm going to come back to nationalisation later on. Peter Hitchens. Don't shoot me. Normally I have no stock with Peter Hitchens and some of his ideas. He's written a terrific piece in the Sunday Mail today about what privatisation has done to Britain. Yes, Peter Hitchens might be waking up. And here's something else, you know, and this is relevant no matter where you're listening in the world. This is serious as well. Nobody's talking about if tens of thousands of men and women lose their jobs, which is planned. All of this is planned. None of this is by accident. It's all by design. This attack on working class people, on middle income people. This is all by design. When these people are forced out of work, there's nothing for them to do. They're going to be claiming welfare, aren't they? John McDonnell made this point this morning. It could cost a couple of billion quid a year in unemployment benefit for these people. But we know, of course, that there won't be that benefit there for them because of the attacks on low-income workers, the attacks on the unemployed, the attacks on the disabled and the sick by this lunatic cabal that's currently occupying Westminster in London. So there won't be any money there for them anyway. It's madness. Oh, it's absolute madness. I'm going to leave that for a second. I'll tell you just before I do leave it. Do you know what really annoyed me, dear listener? Do you know what really, really pissed me off this morning? While John McDonnell was talking to Andrew Marr about Tata Steel and Port Talbot, Marr threw anti-Semitism into the mix. He said, what about your shadow cabinet colleague Chris Bryant, the shadow leader of the Commons, claiming that the Labour Party could lose its foundations in anti-Semitism if it's not dealt with? Marr said, you have activists here and activists there talking about Zionism, talking about Israel. Some of it is anti-Semitism disguised as anti-Zionism. What did McDonnell do? He sat there like the little puppy that he is, and he appeased Marr and he appeased the Jewish lobby by saying, well, we'll root out anti-Semitism wherever it is. We're taking all these strong measures. We're not going to put up with it and all of that. Instead of screaming at Andrew Marr, am I not entitled? Are the members of my party not entitled to criticise the barbarous, murderous, brutal apartheid regime of Israel without being called a racist, Andrew? Over to you, my friend. No, McDonnell sits there. We'll root it out. We'll get rid of the anti-Semites. Yeah, you coward. You coward. McDonnell and Corbyn will never have the opportunity again that they have now. they will be usurped. They will be overthrown by their own parliamentary party. Whether it's this year or next year, they'll be gone. They know this. Use the opportunity now when you're in the national spotlight to tell the truth about Israel and about everything else. Right, back to the papers. Tweet at Richie Allen Show. Email richie@richieallen.co.uk. I will read your tweets out. Have no doubt about it. Will I read some of them out now? Des says, hiya Des, for some reason the Zionists want to close down all heavy industry in Europe. Chinese slaves will then make everything they need. Des, that's right. See every book ever written by David Icke. This is all planned. Absolutely right, my friend. Dean Smith, don't you get the feeling that once we cannot produce our own steel, the prices from China will soon rise? Very good point. Very, very, very good point, Dean. Colm is in Dublin. Good morning, Colm. Top man, Colm in Dublin. Thanks very much for your tweet. LB, hi LB. It's funny how the MSM gives so much attention to drugged athletes, no attention to the drugged up soldiers guarding nuclear weapons. Well said. Oh yeah. Well said. I'll come to that in a minute. Well, I'll come to the nuclear. That's what Bush said. Well, Bush couldn't say it. The nuclear weapons and ISIS and all of that. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes' time. Right, so I've spent a lot of time ranting, and I really should be telling you what's in the paper. Scrolling on down, the Sunday Telegraph, UK aid and the rigged election. So we've talked about UK foreign aid, the wastefulness of it, 172 million quid wasted. It could be spent on projects for British people. Nobody could argue with that. That's not xenophobic. The Sunday Telegraph writes that Tanzania received £200 million from Britain, but held an election that was boycotted by the main opposition party, was deemed a farce of an election, and was so widely criticised that the United States actually cancelled its own aid to the African country. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yes. There's also an interesting story in the Sunday Telegraph about how the European Union and continued membership of the European Union presents a fatal threat to the NHS. That's a good article. I haven't read it, but it must be good, because it's true. Buy British to save our steel, ministers tell local authorities. That's utter bollocks. It is, of course, right, but they're not going to do anything about that. Simple as that. You know? The Star on Sunday talk about the killers of Lee Rigby. Now, don't start. I have all sorts of questions about the Lee Rigby murder. I'm not going to get into it today, so don't start on me. I'm not validating the story. All I'm saying is, with all of this expenditure and money, the Star on Sunday are saying that legal aid payments are ludicrous. And they say that £22 million has been spent on defending terrorists or alleged terrorists over the past 5 years. Now, this is very dangerous and it's very wrong by the Star on Sunday. We've gotten into on this programme in the past how devastating cuts to the legal aid budget have been to people who can't afford a lawyer. So what the Star on Sunday are saying here is absolutely outrageous. You know, they're looking for people to support cuts to legal aid, which every barrister, every solicitor in the country has come out screaming about, saying, no. Then you get a two-tier justice system where justice is only for those who can afford it. Okay? So you got to put up with that. Yeah, there might be some very vile people whom use legal aid funding to help them with their defence, but that's the way it goes. Everybody's entitled to a trial and to representation, regardless of what you're accused of, right? We would all agree with that. Sunday Express, Madeleine McCann, you couldn't make this up. I reckon Sunday Express, 5 of every 10, or 6 out of every 10 front page stories since Madeleine McCann went missing, Sunday Express front pages, 6 out of 10 since then, something to do with Madeleine McCann. Unbelievable. Here's something which will get people rightly pissed off in Britain today. The Sunday People, 500 sex beasts on the run. This is a startling claim. It really is startling. Front page headline of the Sunday People. The story that goes with it explains that 500 sex offenders have vanished from police monitoring, which the People says makes a mockery of the system set up to protect the public. If that is true, by the way, and I don't know if it's true, the Sunday People are alleging it is, that 500 serious sex offenders have gone missing. Ask yourself how. Ask yourself why. That's outrageous, isn't it? Absolutely outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. The Sunday Observer says that at the moment, all the polls about whether Britain should or shouldn't remain in the European Union, the polls are leaning towards a Remain vote. Apparently younger people between 18 and 34 are more likely to vote to stay in the European Union. However, the Sunday Observer also says tellingly you can't guarantee a high turnout amongst the 18 to 34-year-olds who have been polled. Interesting that. Anything in the Sunday Mirror worth looking at? No. Silly celebrity story in the Sunday Mirror. Right, that's it for the papers. I'm going to take a 55-second break. Back with you in a minute. Don't go anywhere.
Do you want to release the full potential of your soul consciousness and find out how to experience that power in all areas of your life now? Go to livingasyoursoul.com for free guidance with in-depth how-to articles, free healing meditations of creation recordings, free soul solutions, and much, much more. livingasyoursoul.com, making the profound practical.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Welcome back to Sunday View Live. If you've just tuned in through one of the players, this isn't a repeat. This is live, and it's live every Sunday from 11 a.m. BST. My good friend Sean Bloor in Manchester says, Richie, I don't agree that Corbyn will be overthrown by the Parliamentary Labour Party. What do you base your argument on? Sean, it's a hunch. It's a hunch based on having kind of seen this sort of thing time and time again, not just here in Britain, but in Ireland and elsewhere. It doesn't matter that the vast majority of Labour supporters in the country voted Jeremy Corbyn in because they were sick of the non-opposition from Ed Miliband and others, that most of them voted him in because they're tired of benefit cuts to people who need them. They're tired of never-ending wars. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I believe Jeremy Corbyn will not contest the next general election. You know, I could be wrong. I'd like to be wrong, but I don't think I will be. And I've said time and time again on my own programme anyway, I don't believe in we don't have democracy. I don't believe in it. We have a bunch of multimillionaire capitalists given to us, presented to us by the establishment to choose from. You know, it's like being given a gun and a knife, basically, isn't it? And told, well, you know, you got to use one of these to kill yourself with. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't. The system is absolutely broken. It's destroyed. It has no relevance. It doesn't work. So it really doesn't matter whether he is there or not come election time anyway. But I don't believe he will be. I believe Hilary Benn will lead the Labour Party into the next general election. Tragically, that's what I believe. But do tell me what you think, and I will tell others. Paul Alawi says the sex offenders aren't missing. They're probably in Westminster. JC says sex offenders gone missing. They're hiding in Parliament. Sean McDonald tweets, Richie, why the hell are the feelings of another country with 8 million population always to be considered in political decisions? He's referring to Israel. We know the answer. Marco says on Twitter, with the avalanche of lies we're fed, I'm starting to question if indeed we live on a globe. Yes. And my great friend Jean-Ann Crowley, who's listening to the programme in Dublin, in Ballyohaclia. Good morning, Jean-Ann. Peter Hitchens has woken up to a point, she says. I echo that, up to a point. That article, by the way, I must tweet it out there. I'll read from it a little bit later on about privatisation, what it's done, the results of it. But I do remember having a wonderful conversation with Professor Alex Scott Samuel from Liverpool University, where he works in social health as a lecturer at Liverpool University, about what privatisation was meant to do, what it has achieved. Anyway, Tweet me at Richie Allen Show, Richie at richieallen.co.uk. Let's move on. Nuclear weapons in the hands of terrorists. As you know, there was a nuclear security summit in Washington. Apparently the greatest threat to civilization is if terrorists get nuclear weapons. Barack Obama posted a video on the White House website at the end of the conference saying that we've done a lot and we've succeeded thus far in preventing lunatics getting nuclear weapons. Well, he hasn't really. I'll tell you more about that shortly. But CBS News have been all over this particular story. It's an interesting one because of the inherent hypocrisy in much of what the world's leaders who attended this summit in Washington, D.C. have been saying. This is CBS News.
Our top story this morning, the president's dire warning about the threat of nuclear terrorism.
At a nuclear summit in Washington, Mr. Obama says groups like ISIS wouldn't hesitate to acquire and use a nuclear weapon. Weijia Jiang is in our Washington bureau with more on that. Weijia, good morning.
Good morning, Vanita. U.S. intelligence does not believe ISIS has the capability to build a nuclear warhead, but it could steal one, hijack a nuclear facility, or create a so-called dirty bomb with the materials, which is why President Obama urged world leaders to recognize the risk of catastrophe.
We didn't just come here to talk, but we came here to act.
President Obama wrapped up a two-day nuclear security summit attended by dozens of the world's most powerful leaders, leaving them with a warning.
The danger of a terrorist group obtaining and using a nuclear weapon is one of the greatest threats to global security.
He says 2,000 tons of nuclear material are scattered in the international community. Groups like ISIS have already used chemical weapons, and al-Qaeda has long looked for material to make them. Pakistan is considered particularly vulnerable.
Let's have a treasure hunt and let's find all those nuclear materials. Pakistan. Interest in Pakistan has been mentioned quite a bit. And listeners to this programme tweeted me while I was speaking with Paul Craig Roberts in the week to ask, is Pakistan on the list? Is it soon to be added to the list of countries targeted for colour revolutions, followed by chaos and civil war? Pakistan, watch it closely. But I tell you what, I'm not overtly worried, and it does make me laugh, Obama saying we have to keep terrorists from acquiring nuclear weapons and we've succeeded until now. No, we haven't. Terrorists acquiring a nuclear weapon. The world's most vile terrorist regime is Israel, and it has nuclear weapons. Come back to that in a second. And by the way, nobody at this conference in DC mentioned the Syrian army retaking of the city of Palmyra, the ancient city. Not a mention of it. I've watched as much of the press conferences as I can stand and nobody mentioned it. Obama took credit again for squeezing, as he calls it, ISIS in Syria and Iraq, even though the US has had nothing to do with the retreat of ISIS. Nothing. Anyway, back to Israel and its nuclear weapons, not that Israel admits it has any. Now, last year, I want to play you this because it was terrific. Last year, Daniel Ellsberg spoke to RT about Mordecai Vanunu. I can never pronounce that. I'm terrible at these names. Mordecai Vanunu, who is still a prisoner in his own home, by the way. Not allowed to leave Israel and subjected to the most inhumane, humiliating treatment because he blew the whistle on Israel's nuclear weapons program back in 1986. This is very interesting. Daniel Ellsberg talking about Israel and what it has and what it doesn't have.
Is it really legitimate for a country to develop nuclear weapons in secret and continue to maintain the secrecy of that indefinitely from the world, or pretend to keep that secret? I think not. I think Vanunu did exactly the right thing by telling his fellow citizens and the rest of the world that Israel had a large nuclear program. And for that, he served 18 years in prison, 10 and a half in a very small cell of isolation, 6 by 9 foot cell, what Amnesty called torture, essentially, for that long period.
Israel sticks to a policy of nuclear ambiguity despite revelations that began with Vanunu back in 1986. Several years ago, the FBI reported several cases of Israel allegedly smuggling nuclear triggers from the US. And just recently, there was the release of a Pentagon report originally written in the 1980s. It detailed allegations that Israel was developing an H-bomb. Daniel Ellsberg believes that it could well be that Israel has one of the biggest nuclear stockpiles in the world.
What Vanunu indicated was that their nuclear stockpile was far larger than even our American Central Intelligence Agency had estimated. He's described in these stories as saying that it was at least 100 weapons, where they had indicated, people who had guessed earlier thought it was much lower. Actually, Vanunu was saying at that time that he thought the material was far larger than that, enough for some 300 or more weapons. And I wouldn't be surprised if to this day the Israeli stockpile is being very underestimated. That might indicate, for example, that they're actually the third largest have a stockpile in the world after the U.S. and Russia.
And we know that Israel has been arming terrorists for years. So if anybody is likely to allow nuclear materials to fall into the hands of terrorists, well, it's Mossad, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest about it. They have form, you know. They have previous. Israel, eh? Vile government. Not the people, not the people. Let's make the distinction. You know, I'm not a coward. I'm not John McDonnell. Not the people. I've met Israelis all over the world when we lived in Spain. Great people, same as us. Most of them absolutely apoplectic at the activity of their horrendous government, their murderous government. It's the government. It always has been and it always will be. And we enable it. Listen to Paul Craig Roberts speaking with me in the week. We give billions of dollars, he said, to Israel, who uses that money to buy our elections so that they can do what it is that they do, which is pursue the Zionist agenda of Greater Israel. Tyrannical is what it is. This is going to make you laugh. While Obama was in DC, he was talking about the Turkish government. He was asked about Turkey and the Turkish government's suppression of the press while he was taking questions at the nuclear summit press conference. This is what Obama had to say about Turkey and its president, J.R. Ewing himself, Tayyip Erdogan.
Some trends within Turkey that I've been troubled with. I am a strong believer in freedom of the press. I'm a strong believer in freedom of religion. I am a strong believer in rule of law and democracy. And there is no doubt that President Erdogan has repeatedly been elected through a democratic process. But I think the approach that they've been taking towards the press is one that could lead Turkey down a path that would be very troubling.
You heard him. By the way, just a couple of quick tweets. More than one of you, and I've had a couple of emails as well saying that, I've had one email and a couple of tweets saying that the Israeli people support their government. No, they don't. What I would, when I say no, they don't. Let's be. We don't have time to go into it, but we can produce statistics about when Israeli citizens are polled on a number of issues, domestic issues and geopolitical issues, that suggest that no, the majority of Israeli people do not support the murderous antics and the murderous crimes of their government. I'll get into that maybe in the week. Funny, on saying that, didn't the brilliant Gilad Atzmon say something to me when he was on the programme last? Something about the validity or the lack of validity to much of the opposition to Israel from within Israel. You know, the credibility of it, the seriousness of it. I suppose it's up for debate. It's not been my experience anyway. As a journalist, I've travelled everywhere. I've been pretty much in every country in Europe. I've never been to Israel or Tel Aviv, it must be said. But by and large, the people I'm in communication with and the human rights groups I've gotten to know over the years, many of them based in and around Israel, they don't support their government. I'll tell you this, the Israeli people are subject to the same propaganda and the same mind-controlled brainwashing techniques by the media that we are here. And I would say a lot of people living in Israel maybe are not, this might sound very implausible, but I'm going to throw it out there as an idea anyway. I would suggest many Israelis actually don't know the extent, they actually don't understand the extent of the brutality from their government towards Palestinians. I can be shot for saying that. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm throwing it out there, right? I'm throwing it out there. Des comes back on to tell me that when polled about the bombing of Gaza, 80% supported it. You're going to have to send me that poll, Des. You know, the thing about polls is polls are easily manipulated anyway. You know, I could imagine an Israeli newspaper doing a poll asking Israeli men and women, do you agree with the bombing of Gaza? And then manipulating the results of it. They're hardly going to publish polls, are they, that suggest that the Israeli people are against bombing Gaza. Look, you know, it's all about opinion, isn't it? Dean Smith was on to say it's another example of a world leader moving their mouth, but absolutely nothing coming out. Presume that he's talking about Barack Obama there. Imagine the hypocrisy of Obama talking about human rights abuses in Turkey. Now, obviously, seizing the computers of a newspaper, shutting it down, threatening the editors, threatening to jail people, buying oil from ISIS, by the way, ferrying weapons to the Islamic State, and also carpet bombing, you know, the Kurdish population whenever you get a chance. Turkey's horrible. Their government is horrible, right? No problem with that. But Obama can talk about Turkey and not about Saudi Arabia. Have a listen to this. This is a little RT report from a couple of months ago about the Saudi Arabian government, kingdom. Have a listen.
Blasphemy, homosexual acts, treason and murder are punishable by death through beheading in Saudi Arabia and Islamic State. Under both regimes, convicted married adulterers can even be stoned to death. Stealing is also a serious crime in both cases and is punishable by the amputation of a hand. In fact, since the start of the year, more people have been publicly put to death in Saudi Arabia than actually under Islamic State. The Saudi record has been slammed by human rights watchdogs, though Western governments are turning a blind eye because of their alliance with Riyadh. Well, that's according to activist Danny Mackey.
This is not just a violation of human rights, it's a violation of pure humanity. So when Saudi Arabia compares this to a legitimate Islamic way of punishment, then they're no better than ISIS. In my opinion, Saudi Arabia has a sort of political consensus or a deal with the Western countries. They continue to commit human rights abuses, and in return, the West is silent on this for political credit, for a continuation and excellent economic relations. Saudi Arabia, in terms of a human rights sense, is one of the worst states in the world.
Danny Mackey is right. One of the worst places in the world is Saudi Arabia. I mentioned a few times on the programme in the past, a friend of ours whom we got to know in Spain quite well, an Irishman who studied, what did he study again? It wasn't journalism. It was philosophy or something at one of the Ivy League, one of the Irish Ivy League universities anyway. Nice guy. Ended up, despite what he'd studied, he ended up working in property in Spain, fair enough. He had travelled around Saudi Arabia years ago. He travelled extensively in the Middle East working with different companies and happened upon a public execution in Riyadh during one of his visits to the capital of Saudi Arabia, and spent years afterwards in therapy. Cold sweats, waking up, relationship problems, absolutely devastated him coming across that. Some bloke was being beheaded, and it had something to do with, he hadn't murdered anybody, he hadn't raped anybody, it had something to do with sedition. So presumably he'd been writing about or secretly holding meetings about the Saud family and life in Saudi Arabia. So they just lopped his head off. Horrendous. Imagine the hypocrisy of Obama. Erdogan is a bastard, right? A madman and a murderer. But alongside Saudi Arabia, Turkey is the Garden of Eden. You know, given a chance, given a choice, we're going to uproot you, Richie. You've got to choose between Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and that's where you've got to present your show from. I'll take Turkey all day long and twice on Sunday. There's not very many good journalists left. By the way, before I move on, and I don't include myself among them, by the way, before we move on, I got to mention... I mentioned my friend and colleague, Jean-Ann Crowley. She's drawn my attention to something David Rockefeller said to the Trilateral Commission back in June of 1991, 25 years ago. This is Rockefeller addressing the Trilateral Commission. This is what he said. Now, we're talking about the media. Listen to this. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. Jesus Christ, game over, right there. Imagine, We are grateful to all these newspapers for attending our meetings and respecting their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. Rockefeller continued in 1991. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the work is now much more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. Rockefeller in 1991. Bought and paid for. The newspapers. The newspapers. This is what you're up against. This is why when anybody mentions nationalisation, when they're talking about industries, decimated industries in Britain, the presenter goes for them, nearly jumps across the table. You're a crazy socialist, Rich. I've heard this a million times before. I'm going to read you from Peter Hitchens shortly, by the way. Orla Gearan is an Irish woman. I've interviewed Orla a few times over the years, not for a long time though. I think she's very, very decent. I think she's very honest. I think her heart has been broken by what she's seen travelling in some of the most war-torn countries in the world throughout the course of her career. I think she's a bit of a hero, God love her, despite the fact that she works for the BBC. She filed a report from Yemen for the BBC yesterday. Thousands of civilians, as you know, have been murdered by airstrikes from the Saudi Arabian-led coalition. Vanessa Beeley, terrific journalist on the programme earlier, late last week, Thursday probably, chatting to me about her own evidence that she gave to the United Nations Human Rights Council about what the Saudis are doing in Yemen, with our blessing, by the way. Orla Gearan, have a listen to just a snippet of this. Listen to the tragedy of this.
And then there's this, the impact on Yemen's schools. More than 1,000 are reported to have been damaged or destroyed by all sides during the conflict. The principal of Shahid Ahmed Al Sayani School tells us it was hit 3 times by the Saudi-led coalition. Half the classrooms were demolished, but no pupils were present at the time. The teachers carry on as best they can. This is 4th grade maths. But these 10-year-olds have already learned hard lessons about war and loss. I'm scared they'll target our house, says Wada, and our friends' houses, and the whole village. Even before the bombing began, Yemen was the Arab world's poorest country. Some here believe it has been set back by decades. The United Nations says this is a forgotten conflict, partly because Yemenis can't easily flee to Europe. But there's been precious little attention for victims like 14-year-old Mohammed. An airstrike hit his neighbourhood as he slept. There was a burst of fire and I started screaming, he says. My grandfather was killed and 2 of my uncles. By God's will, we'll soon get revenge on the enemy.
Yeah, I remember Matthew McConaughey starred in an adaptation of a John Grisham book some years ago. Was it A Time to Kill or something like that? Samuel L. Jackson was brilliant, playing a father who murdered 2 men who'd raped his daughter. But it was in the South, and Samuel L. Jackson obviously is a black man, so his children were black. He was on trial for murder. There was racial tension. Very good John Grisham book. I remember in the film a dramatic moment where Matthew McConaughey asks the jury to close their eyes and imagine the children were white. Now, whenever I see these reports, and Orla Gearan is a terrific journalist, when I see these reports on television, it does occur to me, do we spend enough time imagining that if it was our children, imagine our children were running down the street as buildings are collapsing around them, as Saudi Arabian planes are flying overhead, bombing us to be Jesus, right? I'm struggling here not to lose my temper now. I'm going to hang on. Imagine they were your kids. Imagine they were, if you don't have children, if they were your sister or brother's kids or the children across the street. And our government is happy that that's going on. Lunacy. I'm going to leave that there. Before I move on, It's going to read a few tweets. Thanks for all the tweets coming in, by the way. I think we have our biggest Sunday View audience today. It's growing and growing. More people are becoming aware that it's live. Des, thanks for sending me the Guardian article, which suggested that there was or is overwhelming support for bombing Gaza in Israel. Thanks for that. I've retweeted it. I would suggest again, I would take it with a pinch of salt. I would take any poll conducted by the Israelis themselves, Des, with a pinch of salt. You can't have your cake and eat it. You know, you can't demonise and criticise and polarise the Israeli regime, but then say we can trust their opinion polls. That's all I'm saying, but I might be wrong. LB was on to say, Richie, what's your take on what's going on with Azerbaijan and Armenia? It's not getting very much coverage, LB, but we'll get into it in the Richie Allen radio show this coming week, my friend. No doubt about that. Thanks for your tweet. Jane was on to say 85% polled voted against consequences for the soldier who murdered the Palestinian last week. Guess they think murder is okay. That is vile. Jane, that's a good comment. But again, I would suggest if the Israelis put out a poll that says that their people largely backed the execution of that Palestinian man, unarmed, lying on the ground, incapacitated, again, I would suggest, I would lean towards that it's bullshit. Colin in Dublin, though, he believes the poll might be right. He says it's in the psyche of the people, sadly. I don't think so, Colin. I really don't want to believe that. Marco was on to say polls are there to add cognitive dissonance to your day. Amen, brother. I think we can say amen to that. Right. You know, listening to Obama at the conference in DC, terror this and terror that, terror groups and the war on terror, I was reminded of the great Steve Hughes clip from Live at the Apollo. In fact, this week, David has been emailing me, David Icke, with some links to Steve Hughes' terrific stand-up. And he is hilarious, Steve Hughes. He's also very sharp in his analysis of geopolitics. So you probably heard this before, but if you haven't, it's worth listening to. And if you have heard it before, it's worth hearing again.
The lies we're inflicted with in the 21st century, the war on terror, to me, is the ultimate one. How can you have a war on terror? What are you talking about? This doesn't even make sense. When's this going to end? When they've got the terror. Relax, it's all gone. We're moving on to horror next. This is insanity. You can't have a war on terror. Are you having a war on terror, are you? That's right. What does war create? Terror. Exactly. So you're having a war against the consequence of the actions you're involved in. Yeah. But ours is good terror. It's good, peace, freedom-loving terror, you know. Kind of like terror light, you know. Sort of a diet terror. You know. Sort of, I can't believe it's not terror, you know.
Yeah, Steve Hughes, eh? Right, very quick. What did I do there? Turn my microphone off. Very quick break. It's 12 minutes to the top of the hour. I might be running over. If I run over, it doesn't matter. I can run over. We can do that. We owned it. Victor Kiam. I like the Remington Micro Shave so much I bought the company. I have my own radio station. I can go over if I want. 12 minutes to the top of the hour. Quick break back. In a minute, we'll talk Peter Hitchens and his outstanding article in the Sunday Mail today. Very good article. We'll also talk about paupers' graves. Yeah. Paupers' graves are coming back. I'm not joking either. This makes me sick to my stomach. Tell you more about that in a couple of seconds. Stay with me.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
Do you want to release the full potential of your soul consciousness and find out how to experience that power in all areas of your life now. Go to livingasyoursoul.com for free guidance with in-depth how-to articles, free healing meditations of creation recordings, free soul solutions, and much, much more. livingasyoursoul.com, making the profound practical.
Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Welcome back. Sunday View live every Sunday morning, 11 a.m. BST. It's coming up to 9 minutes to the top of the hour now. It'll be midday soon here in the UK. The sun has put his hat on. Hip, 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 hooray. Used to sing that years ago when I was a child. Sun's gone in behind a cloud, but I don't care because I'm spending the entire day indoors. Oh yeah. Cricket, football. And maybe a cold beer. Maybe not. Maybe something a bit stronger. Maybe not. Love it. Love it. Right. Support the Richie Allen radio show by going to richieallen.co.uk. There are PayPal details and bank transfer details there. If you haven't supported us before, by the way, and you are of a means to, or you have the means to, please do it. Don't listen to the programme regularly if you're in a position to support it and choose not to support it. That kind of gets my goat a bit. So don't do that. If you can't afford to support the programme, you do me a great service by using social media to spread the programmes around and telling others about them. That's good enough for me as well. Peter Hitchens wrote in the Sunday Mail today, the headline is Privatisation, Free Trade, Shares for All, the Great Con That Ruined Britain. I am so sorry now that I fell for the great Thatcher-Reagan promise. I can't deny that I did. I believed all that stuff about privatisation and free trade and the unrestrained market. I think I may even have been taken in by the prophecies of a great share-owning democracy. I thought, this now seems especially funny, that private British telecom would be automatically better than crabby old post office telephones. I think anyone who has ever tried to contact BT when things go wrong would now happily go back to the days of nationalisation. Soviet-style slowness was bad, but surely better than total indifference. Oh yeah. He goes on. Gets important. And it's all very well being able to buy cheap goods from all over the world as we fling our borders wide and abandon the protection of our own industries that everyone says is so wicked and will make us poor and backward. How I miss the old names of trusted brands and the knowledge that these things had been made for generations by my fellow countrymen. But the new broom swept, and it swept pretty clean. In towns I know well, car assembly lines, railway workshops, glassworks, engineering plants, chocolate factories vanished or shrank to nothing. He writes on, a journey across the heart of England, once an exhilarating vista of muscular manufacturing, especially glorious by night, turned into archaeology. Now, if it looked like a factory, it was really a ruin. Somebody usually pops up at this stage and says that we still manufacture a lot, if you say so. But then why are the drug dealers so busy in our new factory-free industrial areas? And why can I never buy anything that was made here, except from absurdly expensive luxury shops? Why are our warships made of foreign steel? Why are the few factories that do exist almost always foreign-owned, their fate decided far away by people who don't much care about this country? And why is our current account deficit with the rest of the world the worst it's ever been in peacetime and nearly as bad as it was during the Great War that first bankrupted this country a century ago? If it's all been so beneficial, why do so many of the containers that arrive in British ports full of expensive imports leave this country empty? Sure, some things got cheaper and there are a lot more little treats and luxuries available. The coffee shops and restaurants are better, but the essentials of life are harder to find than ever. A good life and an honest place. A solid, modest home big enough to house a small family in a peacefully orderly landscape. Good local schools open to all who need them. Reasonably paid secured work for this generation and the next, competent government and wise laws. These have become luxuries, unattainable for millions who once took them for granted. And now, the remains of our steel industry are vanishing. Not because nothing can be done. Any determined government could save it if it really wanted to. but because we're all worshipping that free market dogma that captivated us 30 years ago. I never thought I'd yearn for the National Coal Board or British Steel or, good heavens, British Leland, but I do begin to feel I was fooled into thinking that what was coming next would be any better. At this rate, it may soon be much, much worse. That's the article in its entirety by Peter Hitchens in today's Sunday Mail. A siren call, if you will, I say, to the sheeple, if you want to call them, use that derogatory term. Absolutely spot on, every single word of that. What Peter Hitchens probably doesn't know, though, is that it has been by design. Not by incompetence, not by malfeasance, not by greed, but by design. It's what David calls the Hunger Games Society, and it is right here. And I'm going to leave you with this story. This really, really, really upset me today. Excuse me. It's a story that was on Channel 4 News yesterday, and it's about how people are being plunged into poverty and plunged into misery and into grief when a loved one dies and they realise that they cannot afford to pay for the funeral. They cannot meet the funeral expenses. Do you want to hear this? The funeral business is unregulated, right? The Channel 4 report talks about how... I'll tell you what I'll do. This really got my goat. You can probably tell. I'm going to play the report. This is Channel 4 yesterday. It's about 90 seconds long. Listen to every bit of this.
Yeah, it's a good turnout.
Yeah, he did liked it.
When Liana and Stevie Mayhew's father, Clive, died, they couldn't afford to bury him. They had to leave him in the mortuary for a month while they found the money for a plot.
We did feel like we'd let him down, very much so. And it would have been nice if we could have laid everything to rest and done him proud sooner.
Liana doesn't work. Stevie was only earning £200 a month as a cleaner. They applied for the government's funeral payment to help those on low incomes, but they were refused.
I thought we'd get help from the government because I'm on a minimum wage, part-time job. I would have worked full-time, but obviously where I had to look after my dad, I couldn't be working full-time.
Stevie was told he didn't qualify because he didn't claim benefits. He and Liana had to take out a £1,600 loan for the funeral. With interest, they'll pay back a total of £2,500 over the next year.
It's hard to survive anyway without having to pay money that I was hoping to get help with.
More than half of those who apply for government help with funeral costs are turned down. For those that do qualify for the funeral benefit, the government will pay the cost of the burial plot or cremation fee. But the amount for other expenses, like storage of the body and the coffin, is capped at £700, and many people find it just does not cover the cost. MPs heard from families denied their loved one's ashes because the benefit didn't cover the undertaker's bill.
Imagine, families are being hammered when at their most vulnerable. That is when a loved one dies because they can't afford to pay for the funeral. The average cost of a funeral is £3,700 in England. It's unregulated. It's an unregulated business. The report goes on to say that firms were charging families over £5,000 for a funeral that cost the firm itself less than £2,000 to provide. Imagine how sick that is. Am I saying they shouldn't make a profit? Not at all. Over 100% profit? Something wrong with that. Parasites, aren't they, when people are so down? And the government not helping that man who earns fuck all, a pittance, because he wasn't claiming benefits, because he was looking after his father. How many people in Britain are caring for family members, incapacitated relatives, that the state would have to pay a carer any other time to look after, The family looks after them. Somebody takes over a full-time caring position and they get screwed royally by this government, punishing them for doing it, effectively punishing them for taking care of their relatives. There's a benefit now you didn't realise was being slashed. We're heading for paupers' graves again, folks. Unbelievable what's going on. You know, there are some pockets of decent journalism. We decry and bemoan the mainstream media all the time on programmes like this, but I'll give credit when credit is due. That was a very good report by Channel 4. I didn't think of that. Never occurred to me that people would be living like that they would have to, you know, leave somebody lying in a mortuary for weeks, racking up expenses because they couldn't afford to bury them. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave the programme for there. Right there. That's it for Sunday View this Sunday. Thanks very much for listening to it. I'm just going to give you a quick or a brief look at who's coming on the show next week. Erin Elizabeth joins me tomorrow, hopefully. She's booked in. We're going to talk about disappearing doctors and much more besides. Gerald Salente joins me this week, as does Monica Sepulveda, who's never been on my programme, but she's a woman I know very well. Got to know her in London a few years ago, and she's terrific. You're going to really like listening to her. Should be a great week on The Richie Allen Show. Thanks for listening to Sunday View. Remember, go to richieallen.co.uk. There are PayPal details and bank transfer details there if you do want to support, and if you can support the programme, do that. Big thanks to Claire Calvey, to Aaron and to Simon Stewart for all the help with the Richie Allen Radio Show. I'll be back with you live on the Richie Allen Radio Show tomorrow at 8 p.m. BST. I look forward to seeing you at 8 p.m. BST tomorrow. Until then, have a lovely Sunday. Enjoy the cricket if that's your thing. I'll be watching it with you. Bye now. See you tomorrow.
Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.